Welcome back. I'm Barry Craig. Are you a fan of Dr. Phil, Intervention, Little People, Big World? Well, there's a Paducah connection to those three popular television programs, and he is with us today. He is Eric Streit, Reedland High School graduate, 1987, and I suppose I should say before we begin, it's a Reedland connection because you Reedlanders, I know, are very independent-minded.
Well, Reedland people are independent-minded, but I got to be really honest. I actually live on the south side of Paducah in Farley, so it's.
So you are a Paducah.
I am Paducah, and obviously claim Reedland as my high school, but I went to Farley Elementary School and Reedland High School.
How does a nice young boy from Reedland, Kentucky, wind up as a television producer and director?
Well, I started out always having an interest in television and theater and film. And
when you were in high school, did you do television things?
I did actually. I took some basic television courses from Tom Butler here when I was in 9th, 10th, and 11th grade. I came here for 3 years. In addition to that, I was always auditioning for and performing in shows at the Market House Theater. And I think Paducah has really one of the best infrastructures for someone who wants to be in entertainment or television of any city in the United States, because we have the Market House Theater, we have what's now Western Kentucky Technical and Community College, and the River's Edge Film Festival, which is actually making Paducah pretty well known around the country outside of the region. So we have a lot of great things happening here in Paducah, and it was a great starting off point for anyone that wants to be in television or entertainment.
Now, you served in the Navy, I believe?
I was in the Navy for 4 years, 5 months, 12 days, 7 hours, and 15 minutes.
But who's counting, right?
Who's counting?
So then, would you go to college on the GI Bill after that? Or?
Well, immediately after finishing up in the Navy, I enrolled at the University of Alabama in Birmingham, and I was in college for 6 months before the government shut down in a conflict over budgets. So they stopped sending out the GI Bill, and I couldn't pay my tuition. So I said, well, I guess this isn't going to work. So I moved to Orlando, Florida, declared myself to be an actor, and started working as an extra in television and film down there, and kind of worked my way up into small speaking roles, and found out one day that if I would fall down while a truck was driving through, they would give me a bump of $150, and I was now a stuntman. So
What were some of the television programs you were?
Wow.
In other words, would it be possible if we were to go back, we might see you on some of these
If
programs?
you didn't blink, you might. I started out as an extra on a show called Thunder in Paradise, which was a Hulk Hogan series based at the Disney Studios down in Orlando, and I started out as an extra on that. And then as time went by, I was on the show for 18 months, and I got bumped up to the bartender. And I would sit behind the bar while Hulk Hogan and Patrick McNee or Chris Lemon were talking, and I would do stuff like, here's your drink, sir. Would you like some ice with that? Have a sandwich. I would get the one line here and there, and usually they'd cut away for a reaction. I'd go, wow. And after that, I did a show called Sequest DSV, and that was a Steven Spielberg show that was on NBC starring Roy Scheider, and I still had my Navy uniforms. So I got an extra $20 a day because I provided my own uniforms, and because I understood the naval terminology and the writers of the show didn't, I was on the helm. I was the helmsman, and I would, call out lines that were nautically correct, and I think I helped them out a great deal in keeping the the terminology realistic, because I was the only real ex-Navy guy there, and sometimes the writers would come and say, how would we want to say this if we were in the military? And it kind of functioned as a de facto dialogue coach, and that was a lot of fun. And from there, really at that point, almost every show in Orlando kind of ended at the same time, and I got a job as a stuntman in a Wild West show that traveled all over the country. I did that for 9 months. We did 3 shows a day on the weekdays and 5 shows a day on the weekends, and it was, not a very big step beyond being a carny. And it was a 25-minute, 30-minute show, and it had a good guy, a bad guy, a lady, and a horse, and I was the MC.
Stuff.
And then after that, I also got to bump up, and I was the sheriff for a while, and then I became the villain. And the villain was great because you got to do body burns and stick fights and gun fights and knife fights. And the big finale was falling off of a 50-foot platform into a bag, into an airbag.
And you did that?
Oh, sure. Sure.
What was that like?
Oh, it was exciting. You know, I think I was 23 years old, and I was getting paid to basically play fight and catch things on fire and shoot guns at my buddies. So, you know, we were on the road. We lived in RVs, and we'd show up in a town, set up the set, and people would come, and I think they paid $1 or $2 each, and we'd do the show, and then we'd do it again in a few hours and do it again. And started that out in Florida and ended up in California. I went all the way across the country, and I'd saved enough money and decided I was going to go to Hollywood. So I got out, I left the stunt show in Palmdale, California, which is the Antelope Valley, about 80 miles, and I hitchhiked down to Hollywood and declared that I was now a stand-up comedian and started. And I did open mic nights at the Comedy Store on the Sunset Strip, and I got a day job through a temp agency answering phones for a producer. And as fate would have it, he had a disagreement with his associate producer a few weeks later, and he fired the associate producer and said, "You want to be an associate producer?" And, well, why not? And within about 2 or 3 weeks in Hollywood, I was the associate producer of a series. And
What series was that?
well, it was actually, there were 3 shows going on at once. 2 of them were PBS documentaries. One was called New Media in the Family, which was hosted by Ron Reagan, and the other was called Road Predators, which was hosted by Gregory Hines. And the 3rd show was actually a hidden camera series for the Playboy channel called The Really Naked Truth. And that just shows the diversity of the different producers in Hollywood.
Well, now, what did the folks back home think of this nice boy from Reedon doing The Naked Truth?
Well, I didn't brag about it. I've never actually told anyone about it until this very moment. And if I'm lucky, you guys will cut it out before it makes the air.
Well, of course, back in Reedon, it would have been The Naked Truth.
Well, yeah, and it was.
Yeah.
It was. The temp agency hired me, and it turned out I was able to take what would have been a one-day typing assignment and, kind of turned it into a better relationship. And The Really Naked Truth finished in about 2 or 3 weeks, and then I was doing the documentaries with Martin Sheen and Gregory Hines. And it turns out Freddie Weintraub, who was the executive producer of the show, was doing a series in Lithuania called The New Adventures of Robin Hood. And
in Lithuania?
In Lithuania.
From the Sherwood Forest of Eden, Lithuania.
Well, exactly. Well, there was a big opportunity open for entertainment when the Soviet Union collapsed. And a lot of filmmakers and producers went to Bulgaria, Romania, Lithuania, Latvia, Albania, and they had all these old Soviet-era studios that had, some ancient equipment, and it was perfect because the equipment that the studio in Lithuania had in 1997 was exactly like the equipment that Warner Brothers had in 1937 when they were making Errol Flynn's Robin Hood. So Freddie hired me to go over and be an actor on that series. I worked as an actor and a stuntman again. And
what, were you one of Robin's merry men?
Well, it was very interesting. I was one of Robin's merry men, and basically in the first season of the series, they used all Lithuanian actors and had to loop and dub the dialogue with more American or British accents, and they discovered that it would be less expensive to take some Americans and British people over there to be part of an acting troupe. So one week, they would change your look every week based on the characters that the script had. So one week you'd be a merchant, one week I would be one of Robin's merry men, the next week I would be a villain. I think one time I played, there was a time travel episode and I played Alexander the Great. And
that is quite a time travel
they would,
from Robin's day.
They would dye our hair. They would, put on a fake beard, colored contact lenses, different costumes, and I spent a season on that. And that's really kind of when I transitioned out of acting and more into behind-the-scenes work, because it was very expensive to move crew back and forth to Lithuania. And because I worked as an associate producer for Fred's son-in-law and daughter on the PBS stuff and the Playboy stuff, he said, well, do you want to be the assistant director here? Once someone had to go back, and he actually had me do some uncredited work as a script doctor. And I realized, writing is not that hard for film and television. And being an assistant director, if you have organizational skills, which I had in the military, you can really stay on top of things. And, actors are probably the most vulnerable people in the entertainment business. So if you have a skill like directing or producing or anything, there's money to be made and a career to be built.
That's interesting. Many, many years ago, when I was a young newspaper reporter and was thin and had hair, and that is a long time ago, I interviewed William Sanderson, who was, of course, on the Newhart Show, who his family is from Lone Oak. And he said that the number of unemployed actors is incredibly high. And of course, he was doing the series, Hi, I'm Larry, this is my brother Daryl,
Sure.
older brother Daryl.
Absolutely.
And which he was way up there, very popular. But he said, once this series is over, who knows what will happen? And it's a very much hit and miss business, he said.
You look at some of the most famous people in television who, the one that pops to my mind is Bob Denver from Gilligan's Island.
Oh, absolutely.
That show was on the air for 2.5, 3 years.
He was almost iconic.
He was iconic, but he never got a penny beyond that, and he was typecast in this very specific role.
Exactly.
And until the day he died, he was always Gilligan.
Yeah.
And his career was diminished to, doing public appearances at yachts, yacht sales and
Now,
marinas.
if you're as old as I am, which you aren't, you also remember him as Maynard G. Krebs
the
on
many
old
lives of Dobie Gillis.
Dobie Gillis.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
But you're absolutely right about that. Well, let's talk about these three shows, very well known, the Dr. Phil show. How did you and Dr. Phil hook up?
Well, I was actually doing a series in Orlando, Florida for Bravo called Showbiz Moms and Dads, which was a very successful series for Bravo, and kind of shined a light on the whole parents that force their children into show business.
Right.
And, the pageant moms. And it was really the first series that really kind of focused on that. And it did it in a very serious documentary way. But so I kind of made my own schedule. It was my show and I would shoot when I wanted to shoot. But I was there for about 4 months in Orlando. And a good friend of mine was a supervising producer on the Dr. Phil show. And they needed somebody to do some follow-up work in North Carolina, and they didn't have time for someone to fly from the West Coast. So he called me up. He's someone I've known, also a Reedland guy, and he called me up and said, "I know that you're in Orlando."
What's his name?
Jeff Weaver.
Jeff Weaver.
Yeah, he and I have been best friends since 7th grade, and he was a cameraman and is now the co-executive producer of Little People, Big World. He and I worked on Dr. Phil together, Intervention together. We have several shows in development with various networks, and it's a friendship that stretches back 2/3 of our life. So it's kind of fun that you're in Hollywood with someone you've known since 7th grade.
Yeah.
But he called me up and said, "Look, I need you to drop what you're doing, fly to South Carolina or North Carolina, and do this thing for me." And I went, and it was only B-roll. It was pickup shots. It was beautiful shots of this small town in one of the Carolinas. So I spent 8 hours and made it beautiful. And the other producers saw, "Wow, look at that segment. That's great. Get that guy." And as soon as Showbiz Moms and Dads was over, I had ended up working on Dr. Phil as a director for 3 years. Based on doing a quick favor for a friend. So.
Well, I guess the one thing. How many people know Dr. Phil's last name, and what is it, by the way?
Well, it's Dr. Phil McGraw, and his show is one of the top-rated daytime talk shows. I think at the moment it's number 2 or number 3, and he obviously, like anyone in daytime talk, got his start with Oprah, just like Rachel Ray got her start with Oprah. And but to all of America, to 5 to 8 million viewers a day, he's known as Dr. Phil, America's psychologist.
And I believe you said before we started the program he was born in Oklahoma but lives in Texas.
I don't know if he was born in Oklahoma. I know he spent time in Oklahoma, and I believe he was educated in Texas, and that's when he met Oprah, and obviously went from there to to the Oprah show, and from there to Hollywood to do the Dr. Phil show, which is, I think now it's in its 4th or 5th season, but I was on it for 3 years.
What's Dr. Phil like?
He's a very busy man. We shoot 2 shows a day, 3 to 4 days a week, and he's very involved with understanding who his guests are. And my work on the Dr. Phil show was primarily field work. I would go out and pre-interview all of the guests and do their interviews that you see in the packages. And so I was really kind of the first introduction to the Dr. Phil show, because I would fly to a different city every day, 300 days a year for 3 years. So, with the exception of directing his first primetime special, my interactions with Dr. Phil were limited. But, he's a professional. He's, he likes to understand and know all of the intimate details of his guests and their stories, and he takes it very seriously.
What are the 2 or 3 most interesting guest interviews you made?
Wow, in 3 years I probably did 900 interviews.
Any of them stand out as particularly
Yeah,
odd, unusual, strange?
well, the most fun one is there was a child that kind of I think it's a segment that led to that Nanny 911 series, but it was a child in Indiana who had a his whole thing is whenever his parents would try and get him to do something, he'd take off his clothes and run around the house naked. And sometimes he'd run out the door and be
Now,
gone.
kids, don't do that at home. This is
But and the parents were at their wits' end trying to figure it out, and they brought. I went to the house to do this segment, and sure enough, the first thing the kid does when we turn the camera on is he's running around the house naked. And I forget exactly what Dr. Phil's advice was when they came on the show, but whatever Dr. Phil said to the child, it was just a really quick adjustment, and the parents never had a problem again. But just.
That's terrific.
It was funny.
Intervention. Tell us about your connection with Intervention.
Well, Intervention is an A&E show, and it's still on the air. I believe it's in its 5th season now. And again, the Jeff Weaver connection. He was a supervising producer on that show from the very beginning. And basically, I believe it's still the #1 show on A&E. But basically, with that show, we would follow people who had addictions, whether it was gambling, drugs, alcohol, or anything else. Very serious show. And we would follow that person for a week to tell their story. And what they didn't realize is that simultaneously we were working with their family and therapists to stage an intervention to get them in therapy and get them the help they need to overcome or deal with their addiction. And I worked on that show, many episodes of the show, and it's very real. It's a very tough show to work on.
I'll bet.
Because you're dealing with people who have serious psychological problems, and you're with them 24 hours a day. The hardest thing for me about that show was that it was a very small crew. It was, the producer and cameraman would be one and the same, and it would basically be me and maybe one other producer following the person with the addiction. Well, people with addictions are on drugs and they have stuff in their system, and we're supposed to follow them. And sometimes they don't sleep for 2 or 3 days, and just keeping up and keeping a clear head is very difficult. And it's a show that does a lot of good because most television shows, I think, especially in the reality genre, tend to be very base and superficial and scripted and phony. But what Intervention does is it takes people with real heavy problems, usually people from the lower income strata, and we focus a lot on their problem, and we give them, send them ultimately to treatment facilities that are far beyond what they would normally be able to attain on their own. So I think it's a show that's done a lot of good and kind of educated the public about addiction in a way that no other show has done before. And I'm very proud of the work that I did on it. And it's just a very hard show to do long term because it consumes you and you become very depressed.
Right. Little People, Big World.
Wow. Now, Little People, Big World, it's a show that's still in production. We're in our 4th season. I'm certainly very proud of my work on that show. It's I don't want to dwell on it, but it's a show about a family in Portland, Oregon, living on a 34-acre farm. The mother, the father, and one of the children are little people, or dwarves, and then 3 of the kids are average height. And what this show has done is it's really, for the first time in literature and in the history of literature, it's shows little people as normal people. It's the first show to ever portray dwarves as normal people instead of having magical powers or being mystical figures that live in the woods. So it's Monday nights, TLC, 8 o'clock. It's a phenomenal show, and I think it's done a lot to educate and inform the world about little people.
You're also working on some projects here in Paducah, are you not? Can you tell us a
Yeah,
little bit
absolutely.
about
Well, you know, being from Paducah, I think anyone from Paducah is familiar with Shane, the bear on the air Parker. And one time I was back home on vacation, and I was in Fazoli's out at the mall, and I just saw this whirlwind of activities, and you know, sitting in the middle of it was Bear, and he's got these 6 kids that are just all over the place. And I sat there thinking, well, this is a very similar energy and feel to the show I'm working on right now, Little People. And I knew Bear because he got me my first job as a mascot, wearing a lion suit for WDDJ when he first came back to Paducah from Chicago. And he didn't remember me, I don't think. I approached him and said, Bear, you know, your family here, this is amazing. Are all these kids yours? And yeah, these are my 6 kids. And I said, well, you know, this is just the way you deal with them and the way you are as a family is amazing. I would like to shoot a pilot with you guys. So we very quickly got together, and I spent several days shooting a pilot with his family, and it's been edited into a presentation, and it's currently being pitched to various networks. In my dream of dreams, it would be picked up by CMT, because obviously Bear being a country music DJ out at WKYQ, it would be the perfect, the perfect home for a show. And very Southern feel. Everyone knows Bear. He's already got a listening audience that's one of the largest in the region, so it would make sense for him to have a reality show with he and his family.
That's interesting. When you're out and about, then, do you see things that give you an idea? That would make a great show. You see a guy and the kids running around. Is that how you do it?
I worked for 2 years as a development executive for a company called Andrew Salt Productions, and we did the NBC 75th anniversary special. We own the Ed Sullivan Library, Andrew does, and my job was to make up television shows and go pitch them at a network level. And you're always looking, saying, well, that would be an interesting show. Maybe that, it's storytelling. At the heart of all television, at the heart of all good television, I think, is basic storytelling. And, answering the 6 questions, who, what, when, where, why, and how, in an entertaining and informative way. And I think good television educates people while it's entertaining them, and they don't even realize they're learning anything. And if you can do that in television, you're really accomplishing something, because a lot of television really is a vast wasteland. So if you look at something like Paducah has so much to offer in the way of television. You look at our river industry. People don't realize that up and down the Ohio and Mississippi River, millions and millions of dollars are being spent transporting coal, rock. Our whole energy grid is based on the rivers, and people don't realize that. And I think with the popularities of shows like Axemen, Deadliest Catch, Black Gold, the time is...
Axemen, I love that show.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
love that show.
It's a
My
fun
wife
show.
said, why do you... I was just riveted by it.
Why?
I don't know. It was just cosmic. I watched it last spring, but I just couldn't wait to the next episode. I enjoyed the Ice Road Truckers too.
Absolutely.
It's because it's so odd, but yet it.
What are those shows about to you, Craig?
They're about interesting individuals. I think in the case of Axemen, it's a classic case, humans against nature, and I think that's also true with the Ice Road Truckers. Tough adversity. I got a kick out of going back to the Axemen. One of the machines was a renovated Sherman tank. I thought that was really cool. It just, I don't know, and my wife would come through the room and she would just shake her head and keep on going, and I was just riveted by it.
Well, and that's a great thing. I think we have a generation of people that are coming up right now. Their whole lives they've had video cameras in their faces and pictures and the internet and these cell phones, the iPhones where you can watch television. And I think the today's viewers are not fooled or taken in by the 1-hour dramas or the half-hour sitcoms, because they've been exposed to video all of their life. You're seeing a real shift to reality shows, and there's really horrible reality shows that have nothing to do with reality.
A lot of them I won't watch.
But you're seeing these guys like Deadliest Catch, Ice Road Truckers. These are real guys doing hard work, and these are the stars of tomorrow. Average, ordinary people who are these broad characters just doing a job. And I think that the timing is right to kind of, show the river industry here in Paducah and show the men and women working on the river and the
You
hard
could
work
almost
they do.
see like deckhands. Or
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Deckhands. I mean, the river industry stretches back to Mark Twain.
Oh yeah, even
And-
farther than that.
Oh,
Sure,
yeah.
absolutely, yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I'm kind of fascinated by the whole river industry, and we have done a pilot, and I can't talk much about it, but a pilot has been produced for a network, and we're hoping for a pickup, and hopefully that'll put me in Paducah full time, because Paducah is the epicenter of the river industry, and we'll see that show soon, and I'm always thinking of different television show ideas. Anything that has to do with the green movement or the environment is, Discovery has a new network called Planet Green. So anything that's environmentally friendly. And what I find amazing about the environment is, it's not new. People were living these green lifestyles from, the beginning of time all the way up till about
sure.
1925 or 1930, or really. So, we're just really kind of, everything old is new again. And I think that's what's interesting about, Planet Green. Everyone's kind of getting back to how things used to be. But at the same time, we've got this amazing technology. So it's an interesting combination of old and new.
In the about a minute and a half we have left, we should mention that you decided to venture into politics one time, ran for Congress, didn't make it. Any thoughts about going back into that line of work again?
Well, I think everybody that has the opportunity, I mean, we are a democracy, and we are at the heart of the Constitution, we're supposed to be a nation of citizen legislatures, and I don't think we always are that. So
It's interesting you'd bring that up. Years ago, I was interviewing former Governor Julian Carroll, and he told me in this interview, he said, I think everybody should run for at least one office in his or her life, so you can see what it's like. So you've done that.
I learned a lot, and I think I'll take Julian Carroll's advice, and I ran for an office at least once in my life.
You've done your civic duty.
I have done my civic duty. I think I learned a lot. I enjoyed every minute of it, but I think I'm in television now till I decide to retire from that in 5 or 10 or 20 years, and beyond that, who knows what might be next. But my days as a politician are over for the moment.
Over for the moment. Now, that is a good political answer and a good way to end it. I am not running at this time.
Well, in 10 or 20 years, who
can
knows?
say? Absolutely. Don't want to close any doors.
Exactly.
So. We're out of time. I'm Barry Craig. My guest today was Eric Streit. We will see you next time.